Well, what's liability?
Being responsible.
Being economically responsible for something, right? Well, remember we said general and corporation laws, limited liability, and what did this allow companies to do? Begin to form businesses more rapidly, right? So because of limited liability, and we talked about the Charles River Bridge decision already, which took power out of the states, so it's going to encourage economic development and public transportation, right? We can build lots of public transportation, not like subways yet, but like bridges and canals we're going to build, and turnpikes, and eventually railroads. But there was also the argument of what's happening to people because of this. No one in here has worked in a factory before except for me, but I will tell you that doing the same thing 1,200 times a day for 12 hours a day is not awesome, right? It's not awesome. No one goes to school thinking, God, I cannot wait to take this wrench and do the same thing 7,200 times a week for 72 hours a week. It's going to be awesome. I don't think anyone says that. Maybe they do. I didn't say that when I was in high school. But what it tends to do is it sucks your soul out. All right? If people become doing the same thing over and over and over, right? What ends up happening is it takes skill out of your job, right? Your job, what you're producing, becomes less personal. And I know that's not a big deal now because you live in the world of kind of an impersonal business world, but that's a big deal for people who like to build stuff, right? Who make stuff. You now become not just machines aren't now interchangeable. What has become interchangeable? People have. People have become a commodity. People are interchangeable. Therefore, how will business owners see laborers? As replaceable. How will they see Irish workers and poor workers?
Really extra replaceable.
Yeah. What happens if someone dies in the factory? Do they have insurance?
No.
No. What do? You go find your next potato eater and you put him in there. So what happens is, as the job world becomes more impersonal, it dehumanizes people. Does that make sense? And so that's what the factory world's going to be doing, and there becomes the argument of the northern wage slave. Many northerners were arguing, moral leaders were arguing, that slavery was a horrible thing. Right? And obviously it was. But you know what the South's response to that was?
You have people in factories.
Listen, you're right. Maybe slavery isn't the greatest thing. Although eventually they are going to be arguing. Eventually slave owners are going to say slavery is awesome. They're actually going to make the argument that's good for the slaves. But even before that, they said, we give them housing. We take care of them when they're sick. We get to know these people really well. You do not give housing. These people work in cramped, awful conditions. You pay them barely anything, and when they get sick, you fire them and you bring in new people. And it was called the northern wage slave argument. That essentially, they're just slaves to their wages. People might argue, others would say, yeah, they have the right to quit. If you're a poor laborer and you quit, what happens to you? You starve. So how much freedom do you really have? That's one reason why I am always preaching about more education you get, the better, because it gives you more options. And I can tell you, and I'll say it on video, there are plenty of people who are teachers who could go and do whatever they wanted to. And there are plenty of people who can only do what? Teach. So if they're poor at their job, and maybe some of them are, maybe they don't even like their job. Have you ever had a teacher that clearly hates their job?
Yes.
His or her job? Why does that teacher not leave? All he or she can do. It's all he or she is educated to do. Right? In other jobs, there are plenty of people. My dad hated his job and he kept doing it because he couldn't make more money than that doing anything else. But that's okay because he wasn't hurting anybody. Isn't it bad if a teacher clearly hates his or her job and is going to be there the next 12 years because he or she can't leave?
Yeah.
And because it's not just hurting that person, who's it hurting? It's hurting students, right? So think about that and multiply it 1,000 times. The only thing you can do is use a wrench 1,200 times a day, and eventually your body's going to break down, and then you're going to die as a young person. In fact, who lived longer? Northern industrial workers or slaves?
Slaves.
Slaves did. That's the northern wage slave argument. All right. So that's the argument for the South. Now, let's talk about gains for workers. All right. What gains did workers make? What we start to see are workers beginning to organize. What do we call that when workers are organized into a unit they can argue for themselves? Collectively, right? Unions. Today, especially in the South, unions are very, very unpopular. In the 50s and 60s, unions were very important to our country. The 40s, 50s, 60s. Unions have become much less powerful today. In fact, I would bet most of your families, is anyone's parents in a union? Other than a teacher?
No, my dad as well.
Oh, really? What union is he in? Really? Interesting. Interesting, too, that your mom is economically conservative and your father's in a union. Interessante. What about your parents?
I forgot that they're at work.
Where they work?
Mom works at the credit union, so that counts.
Credit union's not a union.
So you would...
It's not. It's not a union.
You would think it would be.
It's not. Credit unions just mean that people who work or are part of some organization can put their money in that bank, and it gives them certain advantages. It's not a union. They don't get to collectively argue for their rights. For a long time, unions were popular, but before that, they were seen as being very, very bad. Right? Unions have always kind of had this weird... I bet if you go home and ask your parents, many of your parents have very strong feelings on unions. Right? I bet your dad has very strong feelings on unions. My dad is very conservative, and he was a personnel manager forever. He spent his whole life keeping unions out of his companies. On my mom's Irish Catholic side, were unions popular? Yes. They were the road to the middle class. This is what's going to start separating also different types of parties. My grandparents died. My grandmother was 92, my grandfather was 72. For their entire life, they never voted anything but Democrat, ever. They never thought about voting for Republican. The idea of voting for Republican didn't even enter their mind. Because if you're Irish, Catholic, and in a union, you don't vote for that guy. You only vote for Democrats. Remember I said that a lot of those Irish workers voted in blocks, right? That's how they were able to survive and get more union rights. Now, in the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s, labor unions were considered dangerous. These are complainers. But what starts to happen is there starts to be some changes. For instance, President Van Buren limited the federal workday to only 10 hours a day. So now federal employees only had to work 10 hours a day. Today, what do we consider the workday? An 8-hour workday, right? That's kind of what people think, an 8-hour workday. Back then, an 8-hour workday would have been great. Awesome. 8-hour workday, 5 days a week. That's how America rolls, right? Or tries to, and then you get overtime. That is not how the world has always rolled. In Europe, the working hour is a little bit different, right? France, for a long time, did a 35-hour work week. That was their work week. So people are, it's all different. But you start to see some workers working a little bit better. Some of these people are getting better working conditions. People are starting to ask for higher wages. People are starting to ask for job security. And then you have this really important Supreme Court decision called Commonwealth versus Hunt. And this is more of a symbolic type of decision than it is legalistic. But the question was, where do labor unions fit in legally? Is it legal for workers to organize and bargain with their leader, with the owner. What happens in a union is the people of the company come together, the workers, and they have one person who bargains for them. Here, like, let's say I'm the owner of a company, and all of you are workers, right? And Ejo comes to me and she's like, Mr. Sayer, you know, I really like working here. It's pretty great. I really work hard. Yes, Ejo, you do work hard. You are a great employee. And she's like, I would really need my family. You know, I'm having some kids now, and family's great, and I like working here. But I haven't got a raise in 2 years. Can I get a 50 cents an hour raise? And I might say something like, Ejo, you are such a good employee. And I've met your kids. They're great. And I love having you here. Go smirk yourself. And then Bailey comes out and says, Mr. Sayer, I've worked here for so long, and I love working here. You know, I like being a part of this, you know, this manufacturing plant's great, and I really have, you know, not had wages increase for a long time, and I've got this family I'm trying to support. Is there any way I can get $1 more an hour? And I would say, Bailey, I love having you here. You're so great. If you want, you can go smirk yourself, or you can quit. And I don't care which one it is, because I've got 5,000 more Irish people I can replace you with in about 5 minutes. So what is the point of unions? What if all of you come together and Cassidy says, Mr. Sayer, we like working here, but if you don't negotiate with us on better insurance or maybe better wages or better working conditions, we are all going to strike. And when we strike, you'll be making no money. And then what happens is the owner of a company has to see, would I prefer to make no money, or I prefer to give in to the demands, right? Sometimes owners will just stick it out and see what, because when you guys strike, are you getting paid? No. So it becomes who can last longer, right? Who can make it longer? My grandfather struck for 19 weeks one time, right? The holdout to see who was going to win. Sometimes strikes last a long time, sometimes they don't. Sometimes strikers have a lot of leverage, right? The more skill you have, the more leverage you have. There was a firefighter strike in Louisville one time. The firefighters went on strike. Guess how long that one lasted? 4 hours. 4 hours. And the people were like, Ma! Fix this, right? Some of them last a long time. Some of them don't. Presidents see these things differently, but in Commonwealth versus Hunt, the Supreme Court said, unions are not conspiracies. So long as they're peaceful, they're legal. Okay. So that is our industrial side.